Next speaker is Clinton Jurke. Clint is a colleague of mine. He's the agronomy director for the Canola Council of Canada. He also has extension responsibilities covering the Midwest region of Alberta and Saskatchewan. Clint grew up on a farm near Lloydminster on the Saskatchewan side, and he lives in that same area now. Clint will explain how to choose blackleg resistance genes. Here's Clint.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks, Jay, for the introduction, and thank you all for attending this webinar. Yeah, so I guess the question is why are we talking about blackleg when we're talking about selecting the right cultivar for the right field, which is one of our key agronomic priorities for the canola industry is that if we can do a better job at choosing the right product for each field, then we believe that yields are certainly going to go up and grower profitability will grow up. So blackleg is a big deal, and even though you might not see it in every field, if you're looking for it, it is a big deal. Like blackleg is the #1 canola disease worldwide, and it used to be the biggest disease here in the prairies until about 2000. When new resistance came out and did a really good job at controlling the disease for about 10 years. But in the last 10 years, blackleg has been going up, and blackleg's become a trade issue with China. And we need to do a better job at managing this disease, not only for our overall productivity, but for profitability and for our trade situation. So to manage blackleg, we have a 5-step process of increasing your rotation, so the amount of time in between canola crop allows the disease to decompose, do a better job at identifying the disease in the field. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit of detail, but what I'm going to spend most of my time talking about is the use of resistant cultivars or varieties and managing those resistance sources, those resistance genes, so that they will last a long period of time. And there are some fungicides that actually showing a lot of promise as well. But let's go straight to scouting. So we need to scout for this disease, not only just to identify if the pathogen is there or not there, but to quantify it, to know if it is an increasing problem on a farm or within a field. And knowing how much disease is there is going to be really important to not only production and yield, but to know about profitability. Just in the last year, we've launched a new tool on the canola calculator. So if you go to canolacalculator.ca, there's a blackleg yield loss calculator, which will tell us specifically, and actually the model that it's used in this, which was funded with grower levy dollars, is really robust. And it was research done at the University of Alberta, which quite specifically tells us how much yield is being lost if you go out and cut stems at the end of the season and rate them on a 0 to 5 scale. This model will as well, that you put in that rating, you put in how much yield you expect that field should be receiving, but it will as well, if you put in the price that you expect to receive, will give us a financial result. And knowing these numbers are really critical for you to determine how successful you are at managing this disease in the longer term. So scouting for the disease, measuring its yield is quite important, but where I want to spend most of my time is actually talking about resistance and choosing the right cultivar based upon resistance. Now, you're probably aware of like the R, MR, MS, and S categories of blackleg resistance. They've been used since the 80s. And essentially what it is that plant pathologists at the end of the season, they go out, cut stems, like what we're encouraging agronomists and growers to do. And they calculate the amount of infection and then compare that to a susceptible check, which is an old variety from the late 80s called West Star. And on the basis of that, you can categorize the amount of resistance. But this label, while it gives us a general idea of how that product or that cultivar is going to perform across the prairies, it is based upon 3 or 4 blackleg nurseries that are spread across the prairies. And it gives us an average rating of how that will perform. It does not tell us specifically how this product is going to perform in a given field for blackleg. And that is the reason why that there's some new resistance labels that have come and are being used in the marketplace. Before I talk about these new labels, I need to really define the two types of resistance that are present in canola. One type of resistance is called major gene resistance. The other type is called quantitative resistance, or adult plant or minor gene resistance. The major gene resistance is kind of like a light switch. It's an on or off. If the resistance gene recognizes that the pathogen is starting that infection in the plant, it turns on its resistance and kills the pathogen. So there's no more infection. That essentially stops, turns it right off. Well, adult plant resistance or quantitative resistance is more like a dimmer switch. The more resistance genes you got, the more it will slow down the disease progression within the plant. Plant still gets infected, it still has disease, but the more resistance that's there, the more it slows it down. So that's why it's called the quantitative amount. But with that major gene resistance, that pathogen needs to be detected by the plant for this resistance to work. And so that major gene has to recognize that pathogen. If it doesn't, like the pathogen somehow gets around it, then it still gets infected. And so that's where it becomes tricky. And that's why there's some new blackleg resistance labels that have recently come to the marketplace. And that's these labels, RGA, RGB, RGC. Sometimes we just call them A, B, C, D. The RG stands for resistance group, and they refer to specific resistance genes. Now, in this snapshot from the Manitoba Seed Guide, you can see that under the blackleg resistance, there's two columns, a resistance rating, which are all R's. So this is that field rating that all seed companies do to get a variety registered. There's also the resistance group column. And you might notice that at the top, we have this Brett Young variety as an example that has CE1. So that means it has two different resistance genes that are in it, resistance gene C and resistance gene E1. And there's other cultivars out there that'll have like AE2 or AG. So when you have multiple RG labels there, then that means there's multiple resistance genes within those varieties. So that's good. These labels have been agreed by all seed company experts within their organizations that these are the right labels that we should be using as an industry. And so they are showing some pretty good efficacy for dealing with the disease. But here's where we run into the problem is stewardship. We need to make these resistance genes durable and last into the long haul. But unfortunately, what happens is that when we overuse a resistance gene in a field or spread over a wide geography, the pathogen will change, and then that resistance will no longer be functional. And we saw this happen with the very first type of resistance that came to market, which was in a variety in 1995 called Quantum. It had that RGC resistance, so the resistance group C. And it was used very widely by most seed companies across the prairies. And what's happened is, as a result, the pathogen has changed so that resistance gene no longer works across. So that C group is essentially a non-functional resistance gene. So we need to avoid that from happening with the rest of the resistance groups that we're using out there. If we overuse one resistance gene in a field, we can certainly erode that resistance. So the good news is that we have a tool for detecting what specific races of the pathogen are present in the field. And this work was funded as well by grower levy dollars. And we really want to thank the growers for funding this, because now there's 3 or 4 labs across the prairies where you can send samples in. They will tell you specifically what races are present in the pathogen population. So as an example, here we have a field that has 3 races, the AVRLM 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 7, 11. That's one race, and it comprises 25% of the population. This race comprises 50% of the population, and this race has 25%. So there's 3 races that were detected in this field. What these labels or numbers with these AVRLM numbers refer to is which resistance genes will be effective at controlling it. So the red highlighted one indicates that RLM4, which is resistance group D, will control all of these pathotype races that are in the field. And we have other races here, or avirulence genes here that correspond to a resistance gene 11 that does not yet exist. But the good news is that researchers are working on bringing new types of resistance to the marketplace. So this resistance gene RLM11 is currently being developed and funded by SAS Canola to put this gene into canola varieties so that we'll have another type of resistance eventually for the marketplace. So hoping that I'm not running out of time, but I do want to wrap things up, that when it comes to picking out the right cultivar, you really need to understand what's happening within the field. You need to know what diseases you have. Do you have clubroot? Do you have sclerotinia? Do you have blackleg? And what types of resistance you've used in the past, because we want those resistance genes to last a long period of time. So selecting the right cultivar for the right fields to manage these different pathotypes, these different races that are present in the field, is going to be our key to being successful. And so when we think of like how much yield loss can be experienced by a disease, like in clubroot, when the disease is really high, 50% yield losses are possible. Blackleg, maybe not quite that high anymore, but still some very high levels. That when you are experiencing 10, 15, 20% yield loss, that is often a loss that's going to be much greater than the yield potential of a variety. So don't always select a variety or cultivar on the basis of yield. Take a look at what's the threat within the field, and picking the right product that's going to deal with it is one of our keys to success. That's what I want to wrap things up. Thanks, Jay.
Right on. Thanks, Clint.